All right, we're going to get started. Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Zoning for Decarbonization with Urban Green Council. Thank you for coming. Before we jump in, I just wanted to let you know that Urban Green's values are excellence, inclusion, collaboration, and engagement. We invite you to be mindful of these during the program, both when you're listening in and asking questions. My name is Danielle Manley. I'm the policy manager at Urban Green Council, and I'll be moderating our webinar today. And before we jump in, I wanted to thank today's sponsor, Con Edison, for helping us put on this program. We're really appreciative of their support. So yeah, as I said at the start, our webinar today is Zoning for Decarbonization. We're here to help you unpack the proposed zoning changes in City of Yes for carbon neutrality, especially in how the proposed changes relate to building decarbonization. It's a really important topic for Urban Green's audience because the city's zoning code was created at a time before climate change mitigation and resiliency were major priorities for New York City and for New York State. And Urban Green has a long history of helping to move the zoning code forward since our Green Code Task Force back in 2008. Zone Green passed in 2012, and in 2018, we released a report called Zone Greener with a suite of new recommendations for how the city's zoning code could help support green buildings. And here we are in 2023, and the City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality is taking many of these recommendations and many others and incorporating them into an updated zoning regulation for the city. These are going to make all the decarbonization work that we're doing in buildings easier. Earlier this spring, we convened a group of experts to review the proposed zoning changes and provide feedback to DCP to improve the rules. And City of Yes was officially referred for public review in April, and the city's community boards and borough boards are meeting about this right now. And on July 26th, there's going to be a hearing at the City Planning Commission where the public, including anybody on this webinar, can voice their comments about the proposals. So ahead of that hearing, I'm really happy about the panel that we've invited to be here with us today to help us unpack all of this. If we go to the next slide, we'll be starting with Niles from DCP, who's going to give us a high-level overview of what the City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality is. And then we'll have a moderated discussion with experts who work in the field. We've got Kate Selden from Solar One, Adam Cohen from 9 Energy, and Stash Dekruski from VH Architects. And each of them were involved in a convening this past spring with us to review the changes, and they'll help us understand how they're important for energy efficiency and how they'll remove barriers for installing heat pumps, solar panels, and battery storage in and around buildings. And then at the end of the discussion, we'll have a Q&A from all of where each of you on the webinar can ask us questions and we can respond to that. So I invite you to submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of the page and upvote the questions that you think are really important. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Niles Klingel from DCP to get us started. And Niles, you're on mute.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be with you today and talking about City of Yes for carbon neutrality and share some of the research that we've been working on at City Planning. I'm also really pleased to be joined by an excellent panel who will be able to talk about some of the specifics of the proposal and what it means for their work in depth, which is what it's all about. I just want to do a quick overview of what City of Yes is. You probably have heard about it from different quarters, maybe housing Twitter or, the sustainability folks. So there's a lot of stuff going on at DCP in this administration, and I just want to kind of give a quick lay of the land here. So City of Yes is a broad name for 3 parallel initiatives that we're undertaking at City Planning, all designed to take a close look at our zoning regulations and really revisit old, outdated regulations that are holding the city back, holding homeowners back, holding business owners back from making smart investments in our city's economy. And this really is a charge that Mayor Adams gave the agency coming out of the economic slump of COVID. How can we help the city get back on its feet and grow better and more resilient and more vibrant? So these 3 different initiatives will all take the form of parallel citywide zoning text amendments. They are all independent projects. City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality touches on all things related to decarbonization, but it's also not the last word on decarbonization. We'll see decarbonization principles built into and embedded in all of our planning work going forward, including the subsequent City of Yes projects. I'll talk a little bit about City of Yes for carbon neutrality and specifically why we're moving with it first. But just to give you a heads up, if you haven't already heard of a City of Yes for economic opportunity is beginning some initial public outreach this summer, and we'll begin the public review process formally in the fall of this year. This project looks at our outdated zoning use regulations, which still clarify where you can have, for example, whalebone processing, but not modern up-to-date uses like small research and development labs. So it's long past time to update our use regulations, and City of Yes for Economic Opportunity will do just that. City of Yes for Housing Opportunity looks at a citywide level at our housing regulations and zoning districts related to housing, making sure that they're all doing their part to contribute to solving our city's housing crisis. And that project will begin public review next year in 2024. Next slide. So when we're talking at city planning, at least about carbon neutrality, City of Yes for carbon neutrality, what does that mean to us at least? It's a big topic. It means a lot of different things to different people, but in terms of informing this project, what we've really focused on are these three key pillars of decarbonization. First and foremost, reducing the city's energy needs across the board, and in particular, focusing on what do we need to do to retrofit our buildings to become efficient. Second, we know that we need to clean the energy grid. We need to decarbonize the source of our city's electricity, and that's going to take the form of a wide range of initiatives from offshore wind all the way through to small investments in each home, being able to contribute to a smart, dynamic, decentralized grid. And finally, it means that once we've cleaned the grid and we've reduced our energy needs, we need to make sure that we electrify all of the remaining energy needs in the city, whether that's heating our homes or driving our cars. And one of the key sources that we keep looking back to is the roadmap to 80 by 50, which is the city's plan to reduce carbon emissions 80% by 2050. And as you can see in this chart from that roadmap to 80 by 50, buildings play the largest role here. Zoning, of course, plays a key role in regulating buildings. And so there's a lot of headway we can make here. Next slide. We're building on a very strong foundation at city planning. Danielle touched on a lot of the things that have occurred through a lot of the initiative of the Urban Green Council and its members. Zone Green, many of you will know, a citywide zoning text amendment back in 2012 that really moved the needle when it came to allowing for things like rooftop wind and solar, EV chargers, but really needs to be updated. It's now 11 years old, and a lot of things have shifted the landscape dramatically. The focus on decarbonization, the specific roadmap to 80 by 50 that the city has adopted, the feedback from practitioners, including the Zone Greener report that Danielle mentioned, but also recognizing shifts in the legislative landscape, the Climate Mobilization Act at the city level and its landmark Local Law 97, and the CLCPA at the state level with its ambitious solar and storage goals for the city. Finally, we also realize that we need to do a lot more to meet our climate targets, as the IPCC is constantly reminding all those with the responsibility of updating their city's regulations. So we're putting all of that together into City of Yes for carbon neutrality to meet the moment by removing impediments to retrofitting work, solar, energy storage, and electric vehicle charging. Next slide. This project began in March when Mayor Adams unveiled his vision for a City of Yes and what that would mean in city planning. We began very quickly engagement with practitioners who could help us identify the impediments that they faced trying to meet the moment when it comes to carbon neutrality and decarbonization. We've held 4 open to the public pre-referral info sessions. Those were in October of last year and March of this year to share as much research as we could about the proposal in advance of the formal public review process. That began on April 24th, right after Earth Day, when the City Planning Commission began the formal public review process. During that time, we've also had over 100 meetings with stakeholders and experts, and with Urban Green Council's collaboration, some really good working sessions in depth on what it means to actually achieve some of these goals at the nuts and bolts level. Next slide. We talked to all of our partner agencies, as well as advocates and experts in a wide range of industries supporting decarbonization to better understand where zoning of all things has proved to be an impediment and how it can support their work. And we've learned a lot in the process. Next slide. all of those conversations have helped focus us on 4 key goals at city planning when it comes to decarbonization. First, using zoning to decarbonize our energy grid or support the decarbonization of our energy grid. Second, supporting the decarbonization of our city's building stock. Third, supporting the decarbonization of the 2+ million private vehicles registered in New York City. And fourth, supporting the decarbonization of our solid waste and stormwater streams in our city. Now, these projects of decarbonizing all of these different sectors have various scales. Again, they take place at very large scales across the city, at grid-owned, utility-owned sites, but also they take place in smaller and more detailed ways in each city block, and really ultimately in every city home. And that's really where a lot of our zoning work has been focused in on that block by block and building by building scale. But I will leave it to our esteemed panel to talk a little bit more about that process in detail. But just really want to quickly give on the next slide an overview of where we stand in the public review process, which we are fast moving through now. So in April, we began the process, shared the draft proposal with all 59 community boards, all 5 borough boards for a concurrent 60-day review, which ended on July 3rd. We're now waiting on the results to come in from that. We've so far had 22 community boards recommend approval to the City Planning Commission. And I'm happy to say, actually, this as of Friday evening, we have 3 borough presidents, not 2. So the Queens, Manhattan, and Bronx borough presidents all recommending approval of this zoning overhaul. On July 26th, we'll be having a public hearing where the commission will hear concerns and suggestions from the community about how to improve this proposal. And we're looking forward after that to September 13th, when the commission will move on the proposal, hopefully, from my perspective, adopting it, and then beginning the process at the City Council. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the program. But that's where we are. It's a very exciting time, and I'm really looking forward to passing it to the panel to talk a little bit more about what this means for them. Thanks so much.
That was great. Thank you, Niles. So what we're going to do next is we're going to have a moderated discussion with the experts that we brought on with us today. I'll ask each of you to turn your cameras on, and we can get the conversation going. Just so everyone in the audience knows, here's what we'd like to do. We're really going to zero in on the ways that the changes that Niles just outlined touch the building sector. And we're going to focus on a couple of key things. First, we're going to look more deeply at how the zoning regulations will expand deployment of key technologies like heat pumps, solar panels, and storage. And we'll also talk about how the zoning changes are going to enable and encourage energy efficient design in buildings, and what that means. And so the 3 experts we have with us today were involved in Urban Green's convening this past spring and can talk to each of these areas. They're very knowledgeable on it. So I'll ask each of you to introduce yourself briefly and tell us about you and your organization. Stash, I'll invite you to go first.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you for having me on, Urban Green, and thank you all for joining this really important conversation. I'm a principal at ZH Architects, co-founder, and I work primarily in designing high-performance buildings of all different scales. Thank you.
Thanks. So glad to have you with us. And Kate, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, thanks so much for having me. My name is Kate Selden. I'm the solar policy analyst at SolarOne, and SolarOne provides comprehensive technical assistance to buildings that face particularly high barriers to going solar. And so my role is to translate that technical experience on the ground into the policy realm. So excited to talk more about zoning today. Thanks.
Thank you. And Adam.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Adam Cohen. I'm the co-founder and chief technology officer of a Brooklyn-based company called 9 Energy. We're a battery energy storage system developer based in New York, and we primarily work in the 5 boroughs, along with some of the greater New York metro area, developing clean energy assets. I'm a physicist by training, and I've been trying to work in clean energy for a decade and a half now, and New York is one of the toughest nuts to crack. And so we've based our entire business around this, and I've had to delve into so many parts of the business, and zoning is one part of a big piece of the puzzle, and so I'm really glad that all the work that's been going on at DCP and with Urban Green Council, and thanks for inviting me to participate today.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. So excited to have the three of you on. So I'm going to get right to it. For each of the topics, I'm just going to start off with a quick visual for the audience to give it a little illustration of what the zoning changes could mean for buildings. So if we go to the next slide, this one really shows us what some of the changes for heat pumps mean. So, most traditional heating equipment is often located on the inside of the building, maybe in a basement or mechanical room somewhere. But electrifying our buildings requires that that equipment can interact with the outside air, especially air source heat pumps, and they need to be located on the outside of the building. And the zoning rules were created at a time before this technology became widespread. So these zoning changes are going to do two big things for heat pumps specifically. Increase the coverage that's allowed on rooftops for mechanical equipment like heat pumps, and how tall they can be, height allowances, depending on the district that they're in. And it's also going to allow for greater use of yards for mechanical equipment, especially those buildings that don't have flat rooftops. They may have sloped rooftops. They can't accommodate that equipment. Having that flexibility around buildings and in yards can be really helpful. And this picture at the right is an illustration of what that could look like on a flat rooftop. So just wanted to start off with that. We don't have to keep this up for the whole conversation, but wanted to set the audience up for those who haven't seen it, what this could look like. So I'm going to turn my first question to you, Stash. Stash, can you tell us, in your experience, what are some of the challenges that are limiting heat pump installations today?
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that. So as you correctly said, the infrastructure for our buildings over the last many years has been just on the roof, having perhaps an elevator overrun and machine room and stairs. So it's all very limited. And we're really seeing much more increased space requirements. And also, as you mentioned, requirements of heat pumps that have to have exchange with the air outside. So there's a lot of pressure really on where those things can be. We can create a room inside the building and make it open to the outside, but that's not great, right? Because then you're going to have the cold air on a winter day coming in. And so what this is going to do is make it a lot easier for us to build these higher performing buildings that we need to meet our 80-50 goals. And it's not just, it's interesting because you mentioned heat pumps, but for these high performance buildings, we also have to integrate, and especially in the residential buildings, energy recovery ventilators. So what goes with those heat pumps is other components, more baggage, more items, but they're all good items. They all make that building use less energy. And energy recovery ventilators they're pretty large. So in my experience, we might go up 3 or 4 levels on the roof. It's like kind of designing a building on top of the building almost. And there might be levels of elevator overrun, elevator machine room, ERV room for water heaters, room for or an area outside for the generator. So all of these things and everything in this City of Yes proposal essentially gives us as designers, architects, developers, engineers more flexibility, which is what we need.
Yeah, and that's really the important point, just having the freedom to be able to choose what you want to install to help your building become more energy efficient and electrify. There's one particular part of the zoning change that talks about the height limit, and you mentioned the need for ERVs, but can you talk a little bit more about why increasing the height limit for heat pumps specifically might be really important in certain areas?
Well, essentially, heat pumps are interesting, and it's kind of a changing environment, right? So a number of the high performance buildings right now might have heat pumps for heating and cooling, but there are also heat pumps that are out there for domestic hot water, for the hot water for showers and cooking. So this is actually becoming more and more important because in a lot of the buildings that high performance buildings that have been done up to date, we might have had heat pumps for heating and cooling, but a lot of times it was too expensive, or we didn't have enough roof space, bulkhead space levels up there to be able to put those CO2 hot water heat pumps. So this is going to allow us more flexibility, more space, so that we can put some of those units on higher levels up there. And especially for the taller buildings, because in the taller buildings, we need to place some of those hot water systems sometimes at the top of the building, also at the bottom, because it's an energy loss to push that water up and down. So again, it's giving us more room to play with, to be able to exchange air, outside air, and make those systems work.
That's really helpful. And I've also heard from some of those who in our expert panel, our discussions that we've had in the past, that the size of heat pumps, you need to stack them on top of each other to be able to meet the capacity to serve enough power to the building. And there's a need to be able to have this greater capacity, taller heat pump, the ability to put taller heat pump equipment to be able to meet the capacity of a bigger building, and that the equipment is just simply larger. So there needs to be more space vertically to be able to do that. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, it's like I was saying earlier, it's kind of like a little building on a building, right? Yeah, you're kind of stacking these units. They have a certain amount of air that needs to go around them to function properly. You also have to be careful of maintenance. You have to be able to allow people to go up there to fix them, repair them, maintain them. So all of these things go together to mean more pressure, more items that we have to place up there. And what's interesting about the city of Yes is that it's increasing allowances for all of these heat pumps, but also for solar. And there's always a little bit of competition between all these items. So the flexibility on some of the solar items also gives us more opportunity and possibilities for locating and getting effective heat pump operation.
That's great. And that's actually a really great segue, Stash, to our second topic that we wanted to bring up. So if we could bring up the slides again, I want to get into solar a bit more and talk about what the changes are and what we can expect to see. So one of the big changes that's being proposed in City of Yes is to allow taller solar canopies up to 15 feet. So I think what Stash you were just getting at is that some of that equipment can fit underneath the panels, but the height also helps to meet FDNY access requirement for firefighters underneath. And what the changes will do is right now, about 25% of a roof space can be covered by solar panels and have 6 feet of setback from the wall. And that's what we see on the left. But on the right, what the changes are going to allow is 100% of roof space with no setback from the wall, depending on the district that you're located in. And that's a pretty big change. And if we go to the next slide, you can actually see what that might look like from street level. And while it can look like a lot from the top, actually from the street level, you can see in this particular building that it's almost a little game of like spot the difference. On the left-hand side, you can see there's no solar panels there on the left, and on the right-hand side, now the left spot space of the building, you can see the canopies come over a little bit further, but really not a huge change from the street level there. And the other two changes, if we go to the next slide, is that the zoning changes will increase the height that's allowed above sloped roofs. Right now it's about 18 inches, but that can be really limiting for the amount of solar panels that can be added and the siting and orientation of the panels. So the changes are going to add the height limit that can be allowed above sloped roofs. And it's also making a big change for parking lots, where it's going to allow solar canopies as permitted obstructions in parking areas. And that's the picture on the right. So basically what the changes will allow us to do here is have far more siting of elevated solar above parking areas and take advantage of that entire space, which both gives us better solar generation capacity and the added benefit of shaded parking. So my next question is for Kate. Kate, I'd love to have you help us unpack what these changes mean for solar. Can you tell us a bit about the ways in which zoning currently limits solar installations? Are there any examples from projects you've worked on? And we can take the slides down now for the conversation.
Sure. So as you mentioned, so currently, thanks, I believe in large part to Zone Green, solar is permitted as of right up to 4 feet on any building. So this allows for, low profile ballasted or what we call planar systems under 4 feet, but because of the fire codes and the fire paths that are required, that limits the space of where they can go. And then but there's a lot of reasons that buildings want to consider doing a higher canopy or trellis system, which is usually 9 to 10 feet or higher. But in a lot of districts, I believe specifically contextual zoning districts or buildings that are quality housing buildings, if you go higher than that 4 feet and you're already at your height, like you built your building to the max height limit, then you're limited to doing that canopy system only on 25% of the roof. So it can be a pretty small system, which is really limiting because both, the smaller size you get with a canopy, the more expensive it gets. So it might just prohibit buildings from even considering canopy. And then you also have to kind of play like a game of Tetris on the roof where you're maybe doing a quarter of the roof of canopy and then putting ballast in other places and then also accommodating vents and HVAC equipment and maybe electrification equipment. So it can become really complicated, which increase costs to put canopies on roofs that have that 25% limitation. And so as an example, we at Solar One, we worked with a multifamily HDFC co-op a couple of years ago in Alphabet City that wanted to go solar, and it had a very narrow rooftop, so it would have had to accommodate fire paths, and there were a lot of vents, and there was tenant space on the roof already. So initially, when we were looking at the roof and kind of sketching out options, we designed, I believe it was a 40 kilowatt system for the rooftop using a canopy that could go over the tenant space, could go over the fire paths, and still leave ample space. And that would be enough solar to distribute enough credits so that each shareholder could get a little bit of that credit. So that's called on-site community solar, which is a huge benefit, especially to a low-income co-op. And the shareholders, but we realized that the zoning was, I believe it was R8B, and so there was that 25% limitation, and so ultimately they had to shrink the solar system size to about 15 kilowatts, which was enough to offset most of the common area. I think it was about 70% of the common area costs, but didn't have enough solar to send to the tenants. So that was a limitation. I think under the proposed rules, you would see that system be, 3 times the size and allow for that creative distribution of credits and really benefit the tenants and the shareholders. And then I worked with another building last year that was a new construction building, affordable housing, and they were planning to do electrification of at least some of the systems. So they had the ERVs and heat pumps and were trying to figure out how to fit solar to offset those increased costs of electrification. But they had that 25% limitation because of the zoning. And so they could only do a small canopy in one section and then had to sort of figure out a combination of lower profile solar systems on the rest. So yeah, that illustrates some of the limitations in a lot of zoning districts.
Yeah, and it's a lot of complicated crossover between the different priorities that we have. It's almost like competing priorities for roof space here. And how do we, the change here is going to like drastically allow what you can do both for solar, but also for other equipment as well. And I think that's a really big deal. I think you mentioned community solar, and I was also wondering if you could, I didn't really talk about it in the visual example, but can you tell us how the proposed changes might increase the ability to have standalone solar and what that also means for community solar?
Sure. So, just to level set, community solar is a system where you can build a large solar array and then send credits from that solar energy generated to different off-takers. So it can be on site, like I mentioned, where it's on a large rooftop and people living in the building can get credit from that solar array on their electricity bills. But it can also be offsite. So you can think of like large solar farms where you have subscribers who subscribe and get a discount on their bills. And right now, the community solar market in New York has been pretty slow to develop, partially because of financing and incentives that have kind of started and stopped. But also because we just have constrictions on space. We are a very dense urban environment. And so there's less space, there's less huge open spaces to develop that kind of community solar. And so the proposals in this, in the zoning proposal would allow for up to 10,000 square feet system sizes in more areas, including residential districts. And that's not, that's not huge. That's not like a huge solar farm that you're suddenly going to see down the street in your neighborhood. That's a decent sized solar system that could fit over an empty lot or a parking lot or, open space that's maybe underutilized, or could get co-located with spaces that perhaps could benefit from some shading and some protection from the elements. So we really need community solar to be able to expand access to solar. It's, over half the city is renters and they're not going to be able to install solar systems themselves. So it's really a key part of equitable solar deployment to make sure we have a lot of community solar available for people who can't afford solar or don't have a building to put solar on themselves.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I mean, I guess the last question before I go on to the storage piece is like, how much more solar capacity do these changes really mean for the city? It sounds like a lot. We've got more on rooftops, more on the ground. Do you have any sense of what this means for our ability to generate solar in New York City in terms of capacity?
Yeah, so I think someone with more advanced research skills than I have could probably calculate, if you took all of the non-contextual zoning districts, the roof sizes, all of the quality housing buildings, on each building where it was previously limited 25%, we've seen studies. I know Ginsberg Architects did a study that it can be, 3 times. When we did some case studies ourselves at Solar One, we saw buildings, under these rules could expand 2 to 3 times in those districts where they're limited. So if you took all of those rooftops and then added in these, 10,000 square foot open spaces in residential districts and the parking canopies, you could probably figure out a good estimate. I don't know off the top of my head. I know on rooftops, it's, maybe 2 to 3 times on those buildings. But I think it's a lot. And I think I'm excited to see creative co-locations of solar with other things in parking lots and open spaces and on rooftops.
Yeah, that's a ton. And I think it's just taking advantage of so much space in New York City that really hasn't been able to before for solar. So this is really big for that. So we've talked about heat pumps, we've talked about solar. The last piece of equipment we haven't talked about yet are the storage and what the zoning changes mean for storage. So if we can pull the slide back up really quick. So in today's zoning regulation, the ability to deploy storage is fairly limited. Without a very lengthy permitting process. The map at the right, the dark green areas are the commercial and manufacturing districts around the city. And that's really where we see storage being installed now. The light green areas, residential districts, it's just too difficult. The process is too difficult and we don't really see a lot of it in those areas. And what the zoning changes essentially are going to do is expand the ability to deploy storage from the dark green areas to all of the light green areas. It's going to allow small storage in the city's residential districts, meaning if it has a footprint of up to 10,000 square feet, it's allowed as of right, and it doesn't have a lengthy permitting process. And easier approval for larger projects in commercial and manufacturing areas where it's already allowed, but in smaller quantities. So again, like we're increasing our capacity to generate solar across the city, these changes really mean a lot for our ability to generate or to store that energy across the city. And the picture at the right is actually a picture from Adam at 9DOT. Adam, can you tell us what we're looking at here?
Sure. So this is a picture of a project that we built in the Pelham Gardens area of the Northeast Bronx. So I'm on the left and my co-founder's on the right, and you can see actually a community solar canopy in the back of the lot, in the background. And then to the left of me is one of the first battery energy storage systems in New York City that stores about 3 megawatts of clean power from that solar array, but also pulls in from the grid during night times. And then on the right is the equipment that allows that battery energy storage system and that solar energy storage system to communicate with the grid, to pull power in and put it back out. And so these are what today's technologies look like. They're outdoor installations. This happens to be a commercial district. tucked in between a shopping center, formerly underutilized land. And projects like this are what are going to make that area of the Bronx more efficient, more reliable, cheaper to operate as a power grid, and cleaner. These types of projects, there's only a handful of them around New York City. So we're talking about tens of megawatts of projects like this throughout New York City. And every climate model that we have from the state and the city says that we need thousands of megawatts of projects in order to support the clean energy that's going to come from solar and wind, and also from beneficial electrification like heat pumps and storage. So battery energy storage is sort of that glue that puts everything together. They look like these non-assuming boxes with equipment to the left and right that lets it talk to the power grid. And we're developing sites like this in commercial and manufacturing districts all throughout New York City. And the zoning rules that will be enshrined through the City of Yes will make it a lot clearer where these projects can be sited and how we can move forward to build lots of projects like these.
That's really exciting. So as we, this is the types of storage we can install right now. So would we expect to be able to see this in residential areas, or is the battery going to look different in a residential area from what we're seeing here?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So battery energy storage, I think, is the least familiar technology out of this group. So this is called a standalone stationary battery energy storage system, or BESS for short, is the sort of common parlance in the industry. And it's sort of like a Swiss Army for the power grid. It provides lots of functions and resources to make our power grid and our homes and buildings more sustainable. And so like a Swiss Army knife, there's sort of the small ones that have, one or two little features on them, a blade and a nail file. And there's the big ones that have 30 or 40 different features that you can't fit in your pocket. Like it's like a whole toolbox that does everything from a toothpick to pliers to, anything MacGyver might ever need. And so energy storage is going to come lots of different flavors in the long run. It's going to come from small residential size systems that might be on the side of a garage, or in the garage maybe one day. It might be building size that are sort of hundreds of kilowatts that are on the rooftop or in a base or inside the building or next to that building. And then there's going to be that project that we have right there, which is what we call community scale. So it's almost like a community solar project in that the value of it gets divvied up to businesses and homes all throughout New York City. It's similar to what Kate was describing with community solar. And those projects will be tucked into commercial, residential, and manufacturing areas to help those local distribution grids. And that's what the technology looks like today. We expect it to evolve over time. And then there'll also be really large utility scale projects that replace the peaker plants that we have right now. So the range of different sizes, I think it's something like 6 orders of magnitude from kilowatt scale, a set of batteries that would be smaller than in any electric vehicle that we have now, to giga-size projects that would replace Ravenswood peaking plants on the East River. And so there's going to be lots of different projects of different scales. And by having the City of Yes proposal, it kind of shows us how we can kind of go from where we are today to where we need to go over the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah, it's amazing. And one of my questions was going to be, can you talk about the role for energy storage and easing grid constraints? Like how, when we electrify our buildings, the amount of storage that this will allow us to create is really going to help ease that constraint on the grid. You talked about Ravenswood, but now it sounds like buildings and building owners can be a part of that solution and easing on the grid too. And so that's really exciting. I think one other question I have in terms of for anybody who might be thinking about putting storage in their building and installing this type of capacity, I know something I learned in looking at the zoning regulations. There's something called a BSA special permit. What is that in plain language? And will people have to be applying for one, or is it not something that most residential district people have to worry about?
Right. So there's 2 types of energy storage, just like Kate said. There's sort of accessory energy storage, which is designed for at my home, at my business. How do I use the power that I have or use energy storage to support my energy consumption, my energy usage? And that goes through one process. And then there's non-accessory, or front of the meter, as it's called. It's designed to interact with the power grid, not just support one single facility, but to support the power grid. Currently, the way that you can zone a non-accessory or front of the meter power energy storage system, you have to go through different processes. You have to get a zoning. You have to get a new certificate of occupancy. It's a new primary use for that piece of land, and all of the zoning codes for where you site energy storage is based off of basically the 1961 zoning code about how energy infrastructure used to be. You'd have really large power plants by the water in a manufacturing area. Then you'd have smaller substations that set them at voltage all the way to people's homes and businesses. And everything for battery storage has mirrored those rules. And so a non-accessory energy storage system is kind of shoehorned into acting like a substation under today's rules. And substations have always been designed to be close to the load. And so we always knew, even in 1961, that you have to have all this infrastructure that steps down to where people actually need it. With energy storage and other distributed energy resources, we know that a lot more infrastructure has to go by what's called the grid edge. It has to be close to consumption. And so we're going to have more projects that are at that end point instead of at that beginning point. And there's a mismatch between what we wrote in 1961 and what we need in 2023 and 2033 and 2043. And so currently, if you use today's zoning code to site a non-accessory installation near the grid edge, if you're in a residential area, you'll have to go through the BSA process, meaning that you don't have as of right zoning rules. You can't just say, this is something that we need for this area, and hence we should be able to install this. Instead, you have to go through a variance, basically, to demonstrate all of those needs and requirements. Yet we know that there are needs and requirements. And so it's kind of this bureaucratic Byzantine process that could add years and years to the actual development process. And we don't have years and years to develop these projects. And so by sort of having relatively small scale systems at the grid edge, it'll be do a large part to bring us to where we need to go.
That's great. So it's good. No, that did. And it was something I tried to wrap my head around for a while. So I thought it would be helpful for those who maybe have tried to install it in the past and ran into that. Those hurdles might not be there as much in the future for the types of projects that we're talking about in some of these areas. And I think that's really important. So I want to make sure we get to our last topic before we open it up for Q&A. So if we can bring up our slides one more time, these are some very important changes in the zoning code around the rules around encouraging energy efficient design in buildings. The first is that the new code now makes it easier to be rewarded for a variety of energy efficiency retrofits to a building's envelope. Previously, a building's floor area included the width of the wall space. So buildings were incentivized to construct thinner walls so that they could have more usable floor area inside. Some of the changes some of the bonus structures that exist now for buildings gets at that a little bit, but what we're seeing here with the new proposal is that it's going to exempt any qualifying exterior wall thickness from being counted as floor area, both for overcladding projects and recladding projects. So what that means is that it's going to basically give a bonus and not take away any floor area for that qualifying exterior wall thickness to increase insulation and prevent heat loss in buildings. And the second slide here, the second big thing it does is make changes to the zone green bonus. And so for those like myself that are not architects, the current zoning code offers a bonus of extra floor area to buildings in exchange for more insulated walls. Basically a little bit of what we saw on the slide before. But what it does is tell the designer that they can build a bigger building if it meets certain criteria for energy efficiency. But the bonus that exists now is based on a complex calculation and now outdated wall thickness criteria. So the new structure that's being proposed is offering a 5% flat exemption to floor area rather than that complex calculation. And it modernizes it from that wall thickness criteria and breaks it out for existing buildings and new buildings. Existing buildings get that bonus, meaning they get more space to build. If they are retrofitted to be fully electrified. And new buildings get the bonus if they meet what's called ultra low energy building criteria. That means they must be more energy efficient than that energy code or meet an EUI of 38 kBTU per square foot. But I know that's a lot of technical jargon, so I'm excited to have Stash help us understand a little bit what that means. Stash, what do these changes mean for our walls and for our buildings? Maybe curtain wall, not just curtain walls, but our envelope in general.
Well, it's a good thing. I mean, we, from the stakeholders that have participated in Zone Green, then Zone Greener in 2018, and now at City of Yes, we've learned that these deductions or these additional square footages that you can get for making your wall more insulating was not an equal situation, right? So if you were building a mass wall, in other words, CMU or a stud wall, it was more beneficial than a curtain wall, because curtain walls are thinner, they're lightweight, and curtain walls are essentially spanning from they're outside of the building. And so what this does is it levels the playing field for all buildings, and it will encourage more energy efficiency in the performance for those larger buildings, especially when we're dealing with curtain walls. And essentially what we're seeing just in a broad strokes move is that we're kind of reaching the limit of what prescriptive codes can do, right? You can't always say, well, we're going to add X amount of inches and it's going to be perfect. So we're giving the chance to the designer team to say, okay, I'm going to make this building meet this criteria, and I'm going to find a way of doing it. It could be through all of these different aspects, better, heat pumps, better ventilation, better performing facades, all of these things. But it gives the flexibility to the design team, which is really what we need to do at this stage, right? Because these prescriptive measures kind of are not really working for everybody equally. So that's a really important aspect of it. And it also addresses new buildings and existing buildings.
Yeah, and so for the why is this difference here for existing buildings versus new buildings? I didn't explain that, but I think it's a really big reason for this difference.
Well, I mean, we want to encourage all of these existing buildings to become better energy performance. Local Law 97 was passed a few years ago, and it is quickly coming into view. Starting next year, buildings over 25,000 square feet will have to account for their emissions and report them. And we're going to see more and more buildings existing buildings looking to make their energy use attend to this and get them reduced. So one of the proposals here is to require existing buildings to electrify, and then they can avail of this 5% bonus. So you could add on to the building, you could do various things with that. So that's an important one. I think we have had discussions on the stakeholder meetings about should we add another criteria in terms of energy performance, not just electrification. That's for more discussions. But I think generally it seeks to address all of the existing buildings, which are a major source, much bigger than obviously the new buildings as they're being built in terms of energy use that we have to address.
Yeah, and so as those buildings electrify, having this guidance on what is extremely energy efficient is really helpful. And then I think it's also speaks to the bonuses there for existing buildings who fully electrify, and then new buildings. From Local Law 154 in New York City requires all new buildings starting next year for small buildings to be all electric in 2027. Larger buildings as well. And so there's a different bonus structure there that for those buildings, because they're already going to be electric. You don't need to incentivize them to be electric. So we have this better than code criteria. And I guess I know that this can be, this has been you mentioned it, it's been a topic in the stakeholder discussion, but this ultra low energy building criteria, could you explain a bit about what some of the criteria is for better than code and this EUI based criteria, and what some of the experts are thinking in terms of how to make it even better?
Yeah, well, there's essentially two different pathways, being better than an ASHRAE code, ASHRAE energy modeling, and also, or being able to meet an EUI, energy use intensity per square foot per year. So it looks like basically the commercial buildings may go down the ASHRAE pathway. I can tell you from my experience, I do mostly residential buildings, that the energy use intensity that is being proposed is very aggressive. It's a great number. And the discussions right now that we're having are all about, well, what are these buildings that are being built right now that are in their kind of adolescent phase? Because we're only beginning to have some 10, 15 or so, for example, very low energy use buildings like passive house buildings in the city, and we're starting to see how they're performing. And so the discussions that are being had right now are about, well, should we create different categories? Obviously, smaller buildings where that elevators are going to have a lower energy use, the really tall ones, more elevator use, and then more domestic hot water to push that water up and down the building. So I think the discussions would be about creating a few different categories for that, so that we can make it of a fair incentive, so to speak. And I would imagine, just like Zone Green and Zone Greener, maybe in 5 or 10 years, we'll reevaluate, because with what's happening, there's a huge momentum of change in terms of mechanical equipment. All of this stuff is happening. It's really great. So necessity is the mother of invention, right? And it's producing a lot of great things. And I think that we'll be able to revise and look at this in a few years' time.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I just want to clarify, when you said that it's aggressive, I just want to point out for the folks in our audience, these are not required. These are
Yes.
The aggressive criteria are what new buildings can get used to get bonus. They can build a bigger building if they build it to that ultra low energy criteria. So it's really pushing the envelope, pun intended, for buildings to be more energy efficient. So using the tools that the zoning code has to encourage that. So this was really helpful. I want to make sure we get enough time for our Q&A. So I'm going to ask Nihilus to close us out here and tell us what the next steps are for City of Yes. In particular, there's going to be a hearing on the 26th. Let people know, what does it mean to submit comments or come and voice your opinion on the zoning changes.
Absolutely. Thanks, Danielle. And thanks, everyone. That was really, really illuminating. I learned some things every time. It's great. So the next big milestone in our process is the public hearing that the City Planning Commission, which the Department of City Planning supports, will be holding to consider the draft proposal. So like Stash talked about, this is a draft proposal. It is not final. We are taking input from practitioners, from members of the public, all across the city's 59 community boards, community districts, and all of that feedback is going to inform the commission on how to move forward with this proposal, whether to adopt it as is, make modifications, adjustments. That is critical. And so we really benefited from the feedback we've gotten from our panelists, from Urban Green Council, from all the community boards that have held hearings, the borough boards. And ultimately, what I just want to plug is that we're really hoping that everyone who works in the space and has thoughts and expertise and wisdom they can share on these topics can come to the City Planning Commission public hearing on July 26th. In a follow-up email to all the attendees today, we'll share information on how to do that, to provide your insight, suggestions, and expertise on how to make this proposal the very best it can be. That's absolutely our goal here. We want to make sure that this is right, it's going to work, and it's going to help get us closer to our climate goals. So really looking forward to sharing that information and hopefully seeing all of you, whether in person, or you can also send in written testimony that will be considered by the commission and part of the record as well. So that's also critical. And we'll be sharing that information with everyone going forward. So thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing everybody there.
Thank you so much, Nihilist. And thanks, Stash and Adam and Kate, for helping to explain a lot of the technical stuff for us and break it down. We have quite a few questions in the Q&A, and for those of you in the audience who do have a question, please feel free to type it in using the Q&A function. And if you see a question that you really want answered, you can upvote it, so those ones get to the top. So the first question we have here relates to heat pumps specifically. And the question is, how does the height needed for heat pump stacking impact existing buildings? What about load limits in existing or older buildings?
Yeah, I can offer something, Sash. Feel free to jump in. But I think that what we've looked at is that there, I've heard it often mentioned that every building is unique. Every building's a snowflake. And what we've seen in our case study analysis at the department is that to incorporate electrified equipment on the rooftop of any given building, it's going to look different. And it's going to be a complex dance of finding spaces. And that comes down to the structural realities, the finding bearing points and column lines that you could actually drop loads onto that are sufficient. So I know that that's a challenge. And I think that's really one of the reasons that we have tried to the best of our ability to provide the greatest amount of flexibility that also doesn't negatively impact urban character. And that's the genesis of that twofold permitted obstruction system. But absolutely understand that there needs to be a way to fit this equipment and incorporate it safely. I don't know if you have any insights there, Sasha, you could talk about with in terms of specific buildings, the challenges of finding ways to meet that or provide for that load.
Yeah, I mean, we have had a few instances where we have serious limitations in our existing buildings and how to electrify them. And again, we're looking at all sorts of different ways of doing it, whether it's with PV and some sort of battery backup. But also, interestingly enough, I mentioned earlier about necessity and invention. There are now new, because we're trying to go from gas stoves to electric or induction. And there are now new induction stoves that have batteries in them, because induction stoves require quite a lot of electricity to get them started. And so these new ones just operate on 120 volts and they use that battery backup to kick in. So it's a rapidly changing area that people are jumping into because there's opportunity. So that's just one quick example I can think of where things are changing and making it easier for us to electrify.
And that also holds true for the world of solar too. Solar has real weight to it as well. And I think one of the key things with the proposal has been trying to find ways to reduce the costs of the solar canopy and make it more make it easier from a structural perspective and more cost effective. I don't know, Kate, if you have any wisdom you might want to add in there.
Yeah, I was going to mention something similar that, when you can do a larger canopy system, the larger the solar array, the more cost effective because the unit cost goes down. So you're getting a bigger bang for your buck. And then also because you can cover with these proposed rules, you would be able to cover 100% of the roof or almost, anywhere you can on the roof. You're not limited to that 25%. You can attach the solar to the parapets or to the sort of load bearing walls on the outer perimeter of the building, which can, take the load away from a roof that may have, less ability to support a heavy canopy structure. So I think it certainly would unlock a lot more potential for older buildings that could support a canopy, all the way to the perimeter.
Thanks, everyone. So the next question is, this relates a bit to how, I think you've each touched upon it a little bit, but I guess in a specific direct way, are there incentives in the zoning update that would help? Well, this is from a perspective of someone who has clients, but they want to convince clients towards using more electric vehicles, more solar when applicable, and better performing buildings beyond what's required under local law 97. Can any of you talk about the ways in which this pushes buildings beyond local law 97 and incentivizes them to do these kinds of things in their own right?
Well, yeah, I can speak to that. I mean, you can convince your clients by showing them how much money you'll save through reduced local law 97 fines, for example, and then just your typical building, what would be the maintenance required in terms of carrying costs versus what you're proposing. And so that's probably the most effective way of convincing your clients. And there's also a health and aspect to these buildings in terms of them being low carbon, no fossil fuel use, no gas. All of these things are all benefits that are now tangible and have become much more tangible in the last few years. I mean, we've seen what's happened with COVID. We've seen how some of these higher performing buildings with really good ventilation, what it means for people. We've seen, I mean, look what happened a few weeks ago with all of the smoke and folks with higher ventilation type buildings. This is going to be unfortunately more than less in the future. So all of these things will help or should help you be able to convince your clients.
If I could just add on to that really quick, we at city planning, we recognize that there's a whole ecosystem of regulations out there beyond zoning, and local law 97 in particular acts essentially as a very large stick here. In terms of incentives in zoning, we really tried to use the existing incentive, the zone green wall thickness deduction, to kind of pivot that and promote buildings that do more than the baseline code requirements call for. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of what I've learned over the last year, talking to architects, poring over drawings, looking at buildings, is that we're kind of at an even more basic level, which is, backing up the architects, engineers, practitioners who are trying to convince a client to do something. They say, all right, let's explore a heat pump. And then they can't even get the building permits because it's not a permitted obstruction rear yard equivalent or something like that. And so the main thing that's really occupied my time and our time has been to find those impediments and alleviate them so that there aren't old, outdated zoning rules standing in the way. And I think that that's going to be a really, really key thing across thousands of projects going forward. I'm sorry, Adam, if you're going to jump in there and I maybe cut you off.
Actually, I want to echo the same thing you said. Zoning and zoning regulations, changing to the zoning resolution is one part of a bigger puzzle for putting this all together, right? So the building codes are one thing, but we also have to worry about the utility interconnection and project economics. What are the value to customers, and what are the costs? And so I just want to, for the energy storage, I mean, where you can install it and how big it should be is one part of the puzzle, but also what is the value to the local utility grid and what types of utility incentive programs are there? What incentives are available from NYSERDA for installing these projects? What about the federal government and the investment tax credits for solar storage and other energy efficient technologies? It's kind of stacking all those value streams together to make a project work or not work. And I like to think about sort of the city of yes, not just really, I mean, yes, it's good, some nice branding, but it's not necessarily the city of yes. It's more like the city of not maybe. It's sort of like, sometimes the answer is no, you can't do this. Sometimes the answer is yes, you can do this. We need, everybody, all of us just need clarity as to what can actually be done. And so that's the route I think that this part of the solution set is answering. I'll also note for energy storage, actually, a big part of the rules that came out from the Department of Buildings and Department of Finance recently related to Local Law 97 are related to energy storage and how you calculate the benefits to building owners and for solar as well. And so they have sort of specific time of use calculators. So how much energy you're using in this hour and how much carbon is related to that. And so it's not a one size fits all approach. Each building owner, each sort of customer, subscriber, client needs to sort of look at what the value it is for them, and zoning is one part of this broader puzzle.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on, I would definitely echo everything everyone said so far. And, just to drill into the other existing incentives right now, there's the NYSERDA incentives are really strong for solar right now, particularly solar on affordable housing, which is what we deal with at Solar One. There's all kinds of new incentives for community solar in particular. And I kind of think of these zoning proposals as really unlocking the space and the ability to then build the projects that can get the incentives. So from the Inflation Reduction Act in particular, there are 30% tax credit for solar and storage right now was for all projects, but then there's these bonus credits for more equitable and environmental justice focused solar projects. So solar on affordable housing, where the benefit goes to the tenants, or community solar project where the credits go to low income subscribers. But to be able to do those and really take advantage of those incentives right now, the rules are being written, but they're coming out soon or finalized soon. The city, and for New York City in particular, to take advantage and really make sure people have access to solar, we need to have the space and the zoning code that enables those projects. So I think this code will interact with the incentives that are coming down at the federal level and at the state level.
Thanks, everyone. That was really helpful. We've got about 5 more minutes left for the question and answer. There's a question here, see, that I think I know has been a question maybe in some of more of the public meetings that Nihilus has faced, but Adam or Nihilus, there's a question here. We've been told previously by the New York Fire Department that high capacity battery storage is too damaging to catch a fire. Has this changed, or can you talk about fire safety concerns with batteries in buildings and what we're talking about here?
Yeah, well, I can first talk about our interagency coordination, then pass it to Adam, who, as a physicist, will explain this much better than I can. But, I just want to note that we have worked very, very carefully and closely with all of our partner agencies. And so for energy storage in particular, installations generally go through a process that requires a thorough FDNY review of the technologies that are being proposed, and then also parallel review at the Department of Buildings, a specialized office that is studying the technology against building code. And so we've worked closely with both of those teams throughout this process. Absolutely, those review procedures will remain the same and are critical really to the land use considerations that are informing our proposal. And I'll pass it to Adam to talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, this is a really important topic. We've heard a lot about lithium-ion batteries and disasters that have happened within our city with e-bikes over the last year, and really unfortunate technology problems. I'll note just a few things. Lithium-ion batteries are one type of chemistry that have become the standard in the industry, from everything from the cell phones that you probably have right next to you and the laptop computers and the headphones you might have in your ear, to electric vehicles, to e-bikes, to stationary battery energy storage. And so it's something that we put in our pockets and our ears, and we drive on and we see every day. That said, it can be done well. Certified safe systems that have gone through and been rigorously tested, and projects that are not certified, not safe, and in fact have been disastrous and dangerous. For battery energy storage, the type of projects that I work on, the Fire Department of New York, FDNY, probably has the most rigorous standards anywhere in the world for certifying both the technology at the base level, to the systems level, to the site level. And if you can build something in New York, it's going to hit every hurdle, or New York City, every hurdle that's probably the most stringent rules anywhere in the world. Every project that has been designed in New York and that will be designed in New York, the technology first has to be certified by the FDNY. The individual pieces of equipment, the boxes that we showed earlier, were one of the first boxes those are from Tesla, similar batteries that you'd find in a Tesla automobile. That equipment had to be certified by the fire department, get what's called a COA, or certificate of approval. And then that site had to also be reviewed by that agency and reviewed throughout various stages of the design, construction, and operation. And only a small handful of equipment providers, actual suppliers, actual equipment has gone through that process, been rigorously tested and approved in New York City. And so That's partially why the New York City marketplace has settled on a certain type of design. Only a certain types of installations have gone on in the past until now. Well, because only a certain set of technologies have fit all of these hurdles. That said, over the next decade or so, we expect the technologies to evolve over time. And I think the zoning resolution that we put forward allows room for flexibility as new technologies and new products get approved from the small scale to the large scale. I think I'll happy to, if I forgot anything, Nihilus, or anybody else, I'm happy to add.
No, that was authoritative. So thanks.
That was really great. Yeah. I've got time for one more question, and there's some really great questions in here, and sorry we couldn't get to all of them. I think there's actually a specific, it's a rather quick question actually, on the specifics of the ultra low energy building criteria. There's a question for the ultra low energy building. Which version of ASHRAE are they adhering to for the 50% better than in the proposed code? That's based on the current, I think the new language is based on the current code as opposed to any particular year, but I'm not sure, Nihilus, can you, or Stash, could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the intention here is that it would be the year that's statutory and building code. I think that we've heard a lot from practitioners that it's not clear. So we're very amenable to making updates, clarifications here to make sure that it's both achievable and understandable. I don't keep I'm not looking at ASHRAE every day, so Stash, feel free to chime in here on that. But that is something that we're definitely looking at improving before adoption.
Great. Well, I want to thank all four of you for joining us today. This has been a really exciting and insightful talk. I want to remind everybody that there is a hearing on July 26th, as Nihilus already said, and we'll share a link to those that attended the panel today, more information on that. If we can bring up the slide one more time. We just want to tell you a bit about Urban Green's upcoming events. You can sign up now for our Urban Green Gala that we host annually in October. It's going to be October 5th this year. You can register for that at urbangreencouncil.org/events. So thank you to everybody for joining us today. Thank you for your questions and your interest in this. Thanks to all four of you for your knowledge. The slides and a recording of today's event are going to be available on our website soon, and we'll email everyone when those are ready. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.